Answer my 3 questions, the king said to his minister. If you succeed, I will give you half of my empire. If failed, you'll lose your life. The king was in a cheerful mood that day. His laughter echoed across the marble walls of the royal hall, filling the air with a sense of ease. The courtiers relaxed, for they all knew that when the king was happy, the entire court shared his joy. Among those standing near him was his young minister, wise beyond his years, yet humble in manner. The king knew the gleam in his eyes, turned to him and asked, "Tell me, my minister, what is your greatest wish in this life?" At first, the minister lowered his gaze, shy and hesitant to speak. But the king pressed him again with a warm smile. "Come now, do not hide it. Speak openly. What is your biggest wish?" The minister bowed deeply, his voice steady yet respectful. "Your Majesty, you are the ruler of one of the most beautiful and vast empires in the world. When I see your kingdom, I cannot help but think, if I had even 10% of it, I would consider myself the luckiest man alive." The hall fell silent. For a moment, no one dared to breathe. But then the king leaned back, chuckling softly before his face grew serious. "What if I give you not 10%, but half of my empire?" The minister's head snapped upward, his eyes wide with disbelief. He searched the king's expression for a trace of jest, but all he saw was sincerity. His heart pounded. "Your Majesty, how could such fortune ever be mine? Surely you must be joking." But the king raised his hand and commanded, "Bring the royal scribe." The scribe hurried in, scrolls and ink ready. The king spoke firmly. "Write 2 decrees. The first, that half of this empire is granted to my minister. The second, that within 1 year, if he fails to answer the 3 questions I ask of him today, he shall be executed without mercy." The scribe quickly recorded the king's words, sealed with the royal stamp. The minister stood frozen, his mind torn between wonder and dread. Then the king's voice cut through the heavy silence. "Minister, here are your 3 questions. Listen well. First, what is the greatest truth of life? Second, what is the greatest lie of life? Third, what is the greatest weakness of life?" The minister's hands trembled as he wrote down the questions, each word sinking like a stone into his heart. The king's gaze lingered on him for a long moment before he said coldly, "Your time begins now." The minister bowed, fear and confusion gripping him. He stepped out of the royal hall, his thoughts in turmoil. But instead of leaving the palace, he immediately summoned the wisest ministers and courtiers. Surely, with all their knowledge, the answers could be found quickly. They gathered in the council chamber, their faces grave, for they too had heard the king's decree. The minister spoke with urgency, his voice trembling but resolute. "Friends, you have heard the king's command. 3 questions stand between me and death. I beg you all, help me find the answers." The scholars leaned forward, exchanging uneasy glances. One of them whispered, "But Your Excellency, these are no ordinary questions. The king has asked riddles that even sages spend lifetimes pondering." Still, the minister refused to give in. He urged them to speak, to argue, to suggest, and so began endless debates. Day after day, they filled scrolls with possible answers, erasing, rewriting, and arguing late into the night. The chamber became a battlefield of ideas, some claiming the answer lay in philosophy, others in religion, and still others in the study of nature and mankind. But as weeks turned into months, a grim truth settled in. Not one of them could provide answers that satisfied even themselves, let alone the king. The minister felt the sands of time slipping through his fingers. His youthful face grew pale, his once sparkling eyes dimmed with worry. Sleep abandoned him, and food lost its taste. Everywhere he looked, he saw only shadows of failure. Until one evening, a frail old advisor approached him quietly and said in a trembling voice, "My lord, perhaps the answers you seek cannot be found within these palace walls. There is talk of a sage who lives high in the mountains, ancient, wise, and hidden from the world. Some say he has the knowledge of ages. If anyone can answer the king's questions, it is him." The minister's heart stirred with a spark of hope. He rose to his feet and declared, "Then I must set out at once. If my life is to be saved, if wisdom is to be found, I will seek this sage, no matter how far, no matter how hard the road." And so, at the break of dawn, the young minister left the palace and the comfort of his home. Dressed in fine robes, but carrying the burden of fear, he mounted his horse and began a journey that would test not only his body, but also his soul. The young minister rode for days, the hooves of his horse echoing on the empty roads. His heart carried the weight of time, for each sunset reminded him that a year was slipping away too quickly. Finally, he reached the first town on his journey. But instead of the cheerful chatter of markets or the sound of children playing, he was greeted by silence, broken only by the cries of mourning families. As he entered the town square, he saw funeral pyres burning in rows. Men carried coffins upon their shoulders. Women wept bitterly, and children clung to the robes of elders, their innocent eyes wide with grief. The minister stood frozen, shaken by the sight. Those who had died were not of one kind. There were young men, old men, women in their prime, and even children. He bowed his head in respect as the villagers prayed for the departed. The atmosphere was heavy with sorrow, and for a long while he could only stand in silence, his mind turning with questions. Hoping for guidance, he asked the townsfolk about their wisest people. They pointed him toward scholars, priests, and village elders. He met them one by one, bowing respectfully, pouring out his desperate story. Each listened carefully, yet when he asked the king's questions, they shook their heads or gave vague answers. None could provide the certainty he sought. The minister left their homes with a heavy heart. He walked again through the village streets, hearing the cries of mourners fade behind him. He clenched his fists, silently vowing to continue. For his life and his honor depended on it. And so, with sorrow in his heart and determination burning in his soul, the young minister left the town behind, his journey pressing onward into the unknown. After leaving the sorrowful village behind, the young minister pressed onward. Days of travel passed, his horse carrying him through winding paths and dusty plains, until he reached another bustling town. Unlike the silence of the last place, this town was alive with noise. Merchants shouted the prices of their goods, children weaved between the stalls, and travelers haggled with sellers in the crowded marketplace. As the minister made his way through the bazaar, a commotion caught his attention. He stopped to see an old merchant dressed in fine clothes with gold rings glittering on his fingers, arguing bitterly with a poor street seller over just a few coins. The seller pleaded, "Sir, I have given you a fair price. Please don't dishonor me for such a small matter." But the rich man's face twisted with greed as he snapped, "No, you will give me more. I won't pay a single extra coin. Do you think my wealth is for wasting?" A crowd gathered, whispering about the scene. The seller's face flushed with humiliation, yet the old merchant continued his argument, as if those few pennies were more precious than the gold he already carried. The young minister watched closely. A strange unease stirred within him. Here was a man who owned shops, warehouses, and treasures, yet his hunger for wealth seemed endless. Still, the minister reminded himself why he had come. Setting aside his thoughts, he inquired about the wisest people of this town. The crowd pointed him towards scholars, poets, and teachers who were respected for their knowledge. Once again, he spent days with them, sharing the king's questions. Discussions filled the evenings, debates stretched through the nights, yet every answer seemed incomplete, every explanation uncertain. The minister grew restless. He wondered silently, how is it that even the wisest men cannot answer? Could it be that these questions truly have no answers? Or is it that we humans are too blind to see them? With no success in this town either, the minister gathered his things, climbed upon his horse, and rode on, though this time with a heart heavier than before. Leaving the town of Greed behind, the young minister journeyed onward. The weeks slipped by, the sun blazing by day and the cold winds biting by night. His body grew weary, his spirit restless. Months have already passed, he thought, and still I wander without answers. If the year ends without them, my life will also end. One night, as darkness fell over a dense and silent forest, the minister decided to rest. The towering trees stretched like giants into the sky, their branches blocking the moonlight. He tied his horse to a tree, placed his belongings beside him, and soon fell into an uneasy sleep. But when dawn broke, disaster awaited him. His eyes opened to find his horse gone, his belongings stolen, and his heart filled with panic. He rushed through the trees, shouting the horse's name, searching desperately, but the forest gave him no answer, only silence. Fury rose in him. He cursed the thieves who had robbed him in the night. Yet anger could not change reality. He was now alone, on foot, without food, and with a long road ahead. Hunger soon gnawed at his stomach. The path to the next town would take at least 2 days, and he had nothing to sustain himself. Desperation forced him deeper into the forest, searching for anything to eat. At last, fortune smiled upon him. After hours of wandering, he spotted a mango tree near the bank of a river. Though the tree bore only a handful of fruits, to the starving minister they seemed like treasures. He climbed carefully, plucked what he could, and sat by the river's edge. The cool water shimmered in the sunlight as he bit into the sweet mangoes. Each mouthful soothed the burning hunger within him. As he ate, his gaze drifted across the river. There, in the grass, a rabbit grazed peacefully beside her small child. The little one hopped and played with joy, leaping into the air without care, while the mother watched with tender eyes. For a long moment, the minister forgot his troubles. The scene before them was so simple, so pure, a mother and her child finding happiness in nothing more than grass, sunlight, and each other's presence. He sighed, finished a few more mangoes, and carefully tucked the rest away for the road ahead. Then, gathering his strength, he continued his journey on foot, determined to reach the next village. 2 long days passed before the young minister stumbled upon a small settlement. Exhausted, dusty, and worn from travel, he was noticed by a kind-hearted farmer working in the fields. The farmer hurried over and said warmly, "Stranger, you look weak and tired. You must be hungry. Come, my house is not far. You will find food and rest there." Grateful beyond words, the minister followed him. The farmer's home was modest, built of wood, its walls old but clean. Inside, his wife greeted the guest with kindness and hurried to prepare a meal. When the food was placed before him, the minister ate eagerly, the flavors filling him with relief after days of hunger. That night, the farmer offered him a small room, and the minister slept soundly, comforted for the first time in many days. The next morning, he awoke to the sound of laughter. The farmer and his wife were joking with one another, their joy filling the little house. Curious, the minister sat with them. He learned that the farmer owned a single small field, a cow, a few goats, and this humble home. Yet the man spoke with pride and gratitude, thanking God for every blessing. The minister was puzzled. He has so little, yet he is happy. And here I am, with power and wealth, still chasing more. After thanking the farmer and his wife deeply, he resumed his quest, searching for the wise men of the village. But just like before, even after long discussions, he found no satisfying answers. Someone then whispered to him, "On the mountain above lives an old sage. Few have met him, but it is said he holds wisdom beyond compare. Perhaps he can answer what others cannot." The minister, though doubtful, decided he had nothing to lose. Gathering what little strength remained, he began the climb toward the mountain. The minister climbed higher and higher into the mountains, weary from his travels. His clothes were torn, his face was pale, and his heart was burdened with fear. Only a few days remained before the year would end, and with it, his life, unless he found the answers. At last, he reached the sage's humble tent. It was nothing like the palaces or mansions of the wise men he had visited before. Here there was only simplicity: an old cloth tent, a small clay pot, and a weary old sage seated cross-legged on the floor. Beside him sat a thin dog, happily eating scraps from a wooden tray. The sage welcomed him with a faint smile. "You have come a long way, my son. Tell me, what is it that troubles you?" The minister, exhausted, explained everything: the king's challenge, the year-long search, the countless wise men who had failed to give him answers. His voice shook as he said, "Only a few days are left. If I fail, my head will be taken." The sage listened quietly, then nodded. "I can answer your 3 questions." But his eyes grew sharp. "The last answer, I will only give if you do what I ask." The minister's heart leapt. Hope returned to his eyes. "I will do anything you ask. Just give me the answers." The sage raised his hand. "Patience. First, ask your questions." The minister took out the small parchment where he had written the king's questions a year ago. His voice trembled as he read. "What is the greatest truth of life? What is the greatest lie of life? What is the greatest weakness of human life?" The sage nodded slowly. "Listen carefully." He pointed to the first question. "The greatest truth of life is death. No matter who you are, king or beggar, young or old, death comes for all. It is the one certainty, the only truth none can escape." The minister's eyes widened. His mind flashed back to the first town where he had watched grieving families bury soldiers of every age, teenagers, grown men, old warriors. He remembered how death had not spared anyone. At that moment, the truth struck him like lightning. The answer had been before his eyes all along. The sage continued, "The greatest lie of life is life itself. People live as though they will live forever. They chase wealth, power, and desires, forgetting that their time is short. Life deceives us into thinking it is permanent." The minister lowered his head. His journey came alive before him. The old merchant who fought bitterly over a few coins, though he had endless riches. The rabbits in the forest, happy with nothing but grass and sunlight. The poor farmer and his wife, who had almost nothing but laughed with each other in joy. He realized then, the lie of life is the illusion that it will last forever, when in truth, every moment is borrowed. The sage looked at him with piercing eyes. And now the final question. But I will only answer if you do as I say. The minister nodded nervously. Yes, master. What must I do? The sage pointed to the wooden tray from which the dog had been eating. Eat from that tray. The minister recoiled in disgust. What? That food? Your dog was eating it. The sage's voice grew stern. You said you would do anything. If you truly want the final answer, then eat. The minister's pride wrestled with his fear. At last, trembling, he took the tray, shut his eyes, and ate. When he finished, the sage spoke softly. The greatest weakness of human life is wanting. Your desires enslave you. You wanted the answer so desperately that you overcame your disgust and ate food from a dog's plate. In the same way, men enslave themselves to power, wealth, or pleasure. It is wanting that weakens us most of all. The minister froze. His entire year's journey suddenly made sense. The minister descended the mountain with a heart both heavy and light. Heavy with the weight of truth he now carried, and light because the answers were finally his. The sage's words echoed in his mind with every step. Death is the greatest truth. Life itself is the greatest lie. Wanting is the greatest weakness. He rode a borrowed horse across valleys and rivers, racing against time. Day blurred into night. Night into day. His clothes were torn, his face thin, but his spirit burned with determination. Finally, on the last day of the year, he reached the gates of the capital. His heart pounded. Tomorrow he would either hold half the empire or lose his head. The palace guards opened the gates, their eyes widening at the sight of the weary minister who once left in fine robes but now returned like a wanderer. A smile swept through the hall, filled with courtiers and ministers, all eyes fixed on the throne where the king sat in full majesty. The doors swung open. The young minister entered, his robes torn, his face weary, yet his eyes burned with determination. Whispers swept through the hall, but the weight of the moment silenced them quickly. Step by step, he approached the throne. When he bowed, the king's voice thundered across the chamber. So, my minister returns. Tell me, have you brought me wisdom, or have you returned with empty hands? Remember, half my empire awaits you if you succeed. But if you fail, your life ends here. The courtiers leaned forward, breath held. The minister raised his head, his voice steady. Your Majesty, I have journeyed far, through sorrow and joy, wealth and poverty. I sought wisdom from the wise, and at last I stand before you with the answers you demanded. The hall froze, the king's eyes narrowed, a faint smile forming. Then speak, my minister, for your fate rests upon your tongue. The young minister took a breath. His voice rang clear. Your Majesty, the greatest truth of life is death. It comes for all, young or old, rich or poor. None can escape it. A murmur rippled through the court. The king's eyes glimmered, but he pressed on. And the greatest lie? The minister's face grew somber. The greatest lie is life itself. Men live as though they will remain forever, chasing wealth and power, never realizing their time is short. They cling to illusions and forget to live. Gasps filled the hall. Some ministers lowered their heads, as though struck by the weight of the words. The king's smile widened. And tell me, what is the greatest weakness of human life? The minister's gaze was steady. The greatest weakness, Majesty, is wanting. Desire blinds us, drives us to surrender reason, to humiliate ourselves, even to betray what we hold sacred, just to gain what we crave. The hall fell into silence so deep that one could hear the faint crackle of torches. The king rose from his throne. "You have answered well." His voice thundered with pride. "You are indeed worthy. Scribe, write 2 decrees. First, that half of my empire be given to this minister. And second," his words grew colder, sharper, "that this same minister be executed." The court gasped in horror. The minister bowed his head but spoke with calm dignity. "Your Majesty, I once wished that if I had even 10% of your empire, I would be the luckiest man alive. But through this journey, I have learned that I already had everything: respect, honor, food, shelter. I was blind to my own fortune. I do not crave your empire anymore." The king descended from his throne, his eyes blazing, but softened with approval. He lifted the minister's chin. "You have not only answered my questions, you have understood the heart of wisdom itself. You will not die today. Instead, you shall live and serve as the truest minister this empire has ever known." The hall erupted in cheers, the courtiers bowing low. The minister, humbled and changed, realized that the greatest gift he had gained was not land, nor wealth, nor survival, but wisdom.